Alrighty, welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. I'm your host, Tommy Brzee. It is May 10th, and we're going to start talking a little bit about Sonny Dykes and some of the comments he made about a possible split between the Power 4 and the Group of 5 conferences. Definitely a huge topic of conversation right now, but want to get into what that could possibly look like and some ideas that I have for how you can kind of have two separate entities but still overlap to a certain extent. But then we'll get into a little bit of a tough conversation that needs to be had with a couple of different programs out there. There is going to need to be an adjustment of expectations coming forward. You're just going to have to do that in the world of the super conferences. So wanted to break that down, why that is, and why a rude awakening is coming for some fan bases out there. Then we'll get into a little bit of a transfer portal update. I thought we might be done with this, but there have been plenty of recruitments that I definitely want to break down. And also, there was one big time flip that I definitely need to get into and how that kind of affects the rest of the portal and kind of how it affects specifically those two teams in particular. And then finally, we'll finish it off with a kind of a fun little segment talking about a hypothetical playoff bracket. It was put out by CBS, and I kind of want to get into that a little bit more. Shahan Jayaraja had done this, and it was a very, very interesting thing. I will definitely go in and do my own, probably post top 25, post spring top 25 at some point soon, but I figured I'd use theirs for the time being, and then we'll make our way around to my predictions. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here. You can ask a question you were wondering about, call me out on something I didn't say or said incorrectly. I'm all for anything. So again, you can use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. It's a great way for you all to get, on the program a little bit, have a fun back and forth, and maybe ask a question you were wondering about. So definitely use that. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in, and let's talk about Sonny Dykes. And he has said something that has been kind of brewing under the surface for quite some time, right? We've talked about this pretty much ad nauseum because it's the topic of conversation around college football. There is a hierarchy forming in college football that has been there for quite some time. I think we all understand there are certain haves and have-nots, and those go back quite a while in the world of college football. But what I can say is that has only been exacerbated over the last couple of years. I think we all feel pretty confident in that with NIL, with the transfer portal, with all of this different stuff. The scales are slowly tipping more and more into the big guys' direction, into the Power 5 and the group of and away from the group of 5's direction. So a split between these two has been discussed, and it's been something that has been a huge topic of conversation. Some people are very much for it, some people are very much against it. But no one, at least in terms of coaches, have really said anything concrete about it until now. Sonny Dykes has said they have to split eventually, essentially is the way he put it. He said there is such a big difference right now between the haves and have-nots, and I think we'll eventually split into two separate divisions. Alabama and Louisiana Tech aren't playing the same sport. And he's right. That's just the reality of college football right now. I kind of wish it wasn't, but, when you live in a world where money is kind of the way that this sport goes, and it's the way that a lot of these teams, it's required to be a big-time powerhouse in college football at this point. So that's just kind of the way of things. And Louisiana Tech and Alabama are on two totally different planets. If you were to go to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and get a full tour around their facilities, you get a run-through of how things go in their operations, you meet all of the different staffers they have there. If you could do all of that, and then you go on down to Louisiana Tech and you do the same exact thing, you would think these two people were not in the same league. You wouldn't even think they were in the same division of college football altogether. You would think that Louisiana Tech was not remotely competing for the same trophy that Alabama is, which brings us obviously to the big-time conversation that has been happening around the Group of Five, which is possibly breaking off to make their own playoff. And I think this is just, someone else saying in no uncertain terms, there's very little chance for these group of five teams to make it happen. And we'll get into it actually in the last segment when we go into the hypothetical playoff, because it's going to be a hard road for that hypothetical team in that playoff. But at the end of the day, when you look at the possibility for a group of five playoff and what that could look like, I think it's got to happen. And I think for the main reason of ever since the 12-team playoff has been thrown out there, and ever since we've been talking about it, it feels like there's been a sentiment, at least among some people, that we're going to have more Cinderellas, and it's going to be like March Madness, and we're going to have these crazy teams that find their way into the semifinals of the championship. That's not going to happen. I'm just being bluntly honest. Unless something crazy happens in a group of five team where they get, insane amounts of talent in the portal and do crazy things on the NIL trail. If they do things that are fiscally irresponsible or not possible for them to do, then they could pull it off. But the more pressing or the more realistic outcome is they get into the party, they get into the dance as the 12 seed. They go play one of, if not, the second or third best team in the entire country, because it's probably going to be the loser of the Big Ten or the SEC title game will be that 5 team. And if that's the case, they probably get steamrolled in Eugene, Oregon, or in Ann Arbor, Michigan, or in Austin, Texas, or in Oxford, Mississippi, wherever it is. It's not going to be pretty. And let's just say they get through that environment. Let's just say they get through that physicality totally unscathed, because injuries are a whole other part of this that does not necessarily help group of five teams by any means. But if that happens, they do get the treat of playing the lowest ranked conference champion. The problem with that is you pull from teams like Florida State, Clemson, Miami, Utah, Kansas State, Arizona, at least for this particular year. So again, those are teams that likely you're not going to be able to compete with. That's just kind of the reality, and that's just the way that things are going to go in this new playoff. So it's going to be a fun thing to look at. I'm not arguing that, these 12-team graphics are going to be awesome. That's why I'm doing the hypothetical today, because it's so much fun to talk about these hypothetical games that are going to be coming up, and there's going to be some really, really, really fun ones. I just don't think they'll involve many of the group of five teams. Now, there is stuff in the cards for a group of five team, making it happen. We saw Tulane beat USC in the Cotton Bowl. I would argue if that was a playoff game, that's not the outcome. But at the end of the day, it's possible. It's just one of those things where if you're holding out hope that a group of five team will make a run to a championship or even a semifinal, I wouldn't hold your breath, because it's going to be a long time till that happens, and I'd be honestly surprised if it happened ever in this 12-team playoff, to be frankly honest with you. So, but also just another little point to this is TCU was able to get to the championship, and that was the most remarkable thing that we'd seen in quite some time. TCU is a far cry from a lot of these group of five teams. Now, Cincinnati did get into the dance one time around when it was not a great year around the Power Five, and there were a couple of teams that were not nearly as strong as they could have been. And Cincinnati got in and promptly got steamrolled by Bama. So all of this to say, just a group of five team is never going to win the college football playoff. I'll say that right now. I hope that I actually get, roasted for this later on, 5 years down the road, but they're never going to hoist that trophy. That's just, it's not in the cards. It's not something that's going to be sustainable, especially over a 17 game season where you don't nearly have the depth that these other teams do. So it's going to be tough. It's probably not going to happen. So let them play for their own trophy. Let them play against the teams that they're actually competing against on a daily basis, that they're actually in the same bracket with, that they're actually playing the same sport as Sonny Dykes put it. So I think there's a lot of things going into this, and obviously you don't want to see the group of five totally break off from the Power Five. That's not, I don't think, what any of us want. I think we want to see these two entities at least interact some, but they have to be different in the sense of what the postseason looks like. They just, unless you want the group of five teams to get a consolation trophy at the end of every year of saying, congratulations, you were the 12 seed in a playoff and got beaten and had to fly home the very next day, that's all well and good. I don't think that's what Group of Five team wants. So this has obviously been something that has been talked about by Derek Dooley and a couple other people trying to get traction on this. It hasn't gained as much traction as they would have liked, obviously, early on, but I do think the reality is once you get that money in place, and that's a big hurdle that they're going to have to get over in media deals and all of that type of stuff. But once that money is in place, Group of Five teams will jump at this opportunity and not look back. It's really just the reality of what position they're in, where they just have to start stackpiling cash. They have to make sure that they don't go into the red. And that's kind of the mission for the next little bit, especially for these Group of Five schools and some of the other schools, the Oregon State and Washington State, that are out there kind of on their own. They're doing their best to stay in a place where fiscally they can actually keep up, which is easier said than done, obviously. But once that money is in place, once that, is all ironed out and set in stone, all of this is going to happen. And I feel fairly confident about that. I think every Group of Five commissioner and every Group of Five athletic director will probably tell you that they'd rather do their own thing. They'd rather have their own playoff, but if the money's not there, it doesn't make sense to do that. It doesn't make sense just to, be on your own and lift a trophy without, the monetary value that comes with that. So as long as you can get over that $2 million per year to going to every team from the current college football playoff format, I think they're going to find their way out. And I think they'll do it rather quickly. So can they do that? It's a big hurdle to get over, and it feels like they're quite a ways from making that happen. But I kind of hope they do. I'll put it that way. I really do think that that would be the greatest thing for the Group of Five and for college football overall. Now, what would that look like? And I have a couple ideas of what the scheduling could look like in this grand scheme of things, and how you can have these two different entities when it comes to postseason, but the regular season can still kind of be mixed a little bit. So let's get into this real quick. And I think the biggest thing here is you got to have uniform scheduling. It's something I've been screaming from the treetops for a million years, and no one seems to really be making big progress on that. But if this were to happen, I think you would see that more and more, where, you're not able to play Group of Five teams quite as much. So I would say these Power Five or Power Four, whichever way it cuts, really, would be forced to play other Power 5 or Power 4 teams in the first 11 games of the season, or just 11 games a year. And then that extra game would be to the Group of Five team. That would, obviously help with the financial situation, where you still get that paycheck. You still get to, dole out that money to the smaller programs that need it in certain circumstances. And then in the Group of Five playoff could mirror what the Power Five is going to look like in structure. It could have the same number of teams. It could have the same formatting in terms of playing home games. It could just be entirely home games, just to make the scheduling a little bit easier in terms of getting actual stadiums to play in. But that could be a totally different thing. And then scheduling is obviously a huge part of this, where you don't want them all playing on the same day. Well, maybe Group of Five plays Thursday and Friday, and then you have the Power Five on Saturday. It gives you the ability to set up media deals with companies that are already in on the college football playoff, so you don't have to necessarily struggle as much. You can compromise where you're going to need to, because you want to get on TV if you're the Group of Five and you want people watching. So those Thursday and Friday night slots in the fall, obviously Thursday night football makes that a little bit more sketchy, but Friday night is pretty open. And obviously you're not going to have the biggest of crowds, but you got to find a day that works for everyone and works the Group of Five into this. And I think Thursday or Friday could absolutely be an answer to that. And then finally, I think the non-Group of Five playoff, or the non-playoff Group of Five teams in this new format would play in pretty much any bowl game. The postseason in terms of the bowls is totally synchronous between the two, and I think that is totally doable. I think there's an ability where, you don't have to have entirely different postseasons. You just need to have different playoffs. And then you can have, the teams that just missed the cut for the playoff in the Group of Five and in the Power Five, they can find their way into different bowl games based on record, and you can have Power 5 teams playing Group of 5 teams. You can have Group of 5 teams playing other Group of 5, and vice versa with Power 5. So I think there's answers here. I guess the best way to sum this up, I think there's ways for them to move forward in asynchronous postseasons, asynchronous playoffs, but still as one entity. And it sounds like a weird concept. It sounds like something that, and maybe it is. Maybe it is my head in the clouds a little bit, but I do think it's possible. I do think that all this stuff can happen. You just got to have the right people at the wheel. And that's something that has been a little bit hard to come by for college football for quite some time. But you don't want to lose the App State going to College Station and getting a huge win for their program. You don't want to lose those games. So you got to keep at least some of that. And you don't have to keep a lot of it. And you can give these guys all the opportunity in the world to be in their own playoff and be on their own stand alone, essentially. But you can still give them the ability to play the big dogs and have those incredible moments and make what makes college football awesome. It's still intact, not going anywhere necessarily, just a little bit different of a formatting. So it'll be fascinating to see how this actually shakes out, who the players are, who ends up stepping up to the plate, if anyone does. So there's a ton of stuff going in every different direction. I do think the best way forward is Power 5 playoff, Group of 5 playoff, and then a postseason that somewhat overlaps with each other. But at the end of the day, that is a lot of clerical work. We will get there at some point, hopefully, but it might be a little ways down the road. But we're going to take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about something that I think needs to be talked about a little bit more in the world of the Super League, which is there's going to be need to be an expectation adjustment for a number of programs out there. And I'll get into a couple of examples of teams that could be under that, but also could be in great hands. It's much of a toss-up. So we'll get into kind of what I mean and how it's going to be a very interesting time for coaches and fans over this next little bit right after this.